You probably saw the story about the three Palestinian men that were shot in Vermont, which is a horrible story. They've been charged with a hate crime. This was students enjoying a visit to Vermont, celebrating Thanksgiving and a pair of family birthdays, and then they were shot by a guy in his middle-aged guy, and they're saying it might have been a hate crime. We don't know a whole lot more details, but we're waiting on that. We've also seen what we believe to be an uptick in anti-Semitism. In fact, you may recall the FBI director a month ago was testifying, and he said, look, the U.S. is reaching historic levels of anti-Semitism, and especially with what we're seeing in Gaza right now, which is entering a sort of a last-minute extended ceasefire. I don't know if that makes sense. The ceasefire was supposed to end last night, and then at the very end of that scheduled ceasefire, they were able to extend it another day. Hamas says they've got 3 hostages, including a 10-month-old child, that have died. They are blaming Israel for the deaths of those hostages, saying, well, this is because of the bombing on Gaza, and they bombed the location where they were. So a lot of madness happening right now. And a lot of us here in the United States watching what's happening in the Middle East, and it seems to be, I don't know, triggering some people. Dr. Alex Del Carmen is the head of School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University. And Dr. Del Carmen, where are we right now? I mean, an uptick in anti-Semitism, what is causing people to suddenly find hate right now or activate the hate that they had?
You know, nowadays, I think what happens is we've got social media, which connects people to, the other half of the world. And what's happened is as they watch all of these, various conflicts going on around the world, they personalize them, and they want to show either their support and sometimes fanatical support, towards a particular cause. And so, sadly, in the United States, we're seeing that divide manifest in the form of violence, which is very, very concerning, as the FBI director noted.
Is this sort of along the lines of what we're seeing with the tribalism in the United States? So we're becoming more tribal, and so along with that social media, some people are trying to fit into that tribe, and so they're kind of taking on these stances that, I don't know, maybe they otherwise wouldn't have done that. They kind of go along to get along with other people that they, relate to in other aspects. I'm just trying to understand it.
Yeah, I would argue that we're becoming more territorial about our politics and about our ideology and about the way we want to live our lives. I mean, I think you can cross state lines and go to another state in the United States that has a radically different philosophy about how we should live our lives, and even the interpretation of the Constitution. And so it's almost like going to 50 different countries, all of which are supposed to be part of the United States, right?
Yeah. Well, some people would say that's the way it was supposed to be from the very beginning. Dr. Alex Del Carmen is the head of School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University. Is there a way that people can be, nuanced? Let me say nuanced. And let me preface it by saying this. I was reading the daily, update from the New York Times today, and they were talking about different polls. Most Americans say that Israel's military response has been both reasonable and understandable. So 76% say, yeah, what Israel is doing in response to those attacks on October 7th is exactly what we would think would be a reasonable response. And yet also, the same poll shows that 68% agree that Israel should call a ceasefire and try to negotiate. In other words, they say that bombing the hell out of Gaza is totally appropriate, and they should stop doing it. So it seems like people are a little bit conflicted internally, but also there's more nuance to this. It's not nobody's calling for genocide of one side or the other right now. Except sort of the extremists. And it's the extremists we're talking about when we talk about anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. So is there a way to bring people into the conversation to back them off the ledges?
Yeah, I've always argued that education is a powerful tool. But miseducation and not being educated enough, it's also a powerful tool, but sadly it takes a downspiral to what we're seeing now throughout the United States. Look, at the end of the day, when we find that there are all these radical groups that are basically empowering themselves to cause harm on others, what we are seeing is that they existed prior to this conflict, and they're going to exist after this conflict takes place. They're just finding this as an opportunity in order to show their hatred towards our country and the hatred towards the quote-unquote democracy that we stand for. And I would argue that on both ends, right? The individuals that target Palestinians and the individual that targets, Jews in the United States are both equally guilty and should not be part of our society as it relates to democracy, right? Because they're hijacking it and taking it to the next level. It also underscores in many ways how divided we are in our country, which is very sad.
So are you telling me that that what we believe is, or at least maybe what we should be thinking is that some of this hatred, it lies dormant in people until there's an opportunity to activate it? And right now it's sort of being called up. So listen, you've been anti-Semitic for a while. Now's your chance. Is that kind of where we are?
That's exactly right. And these radicalizations and radicalizing an ideology does not take place overnight. We know as criminologists that it's a process. People begin to sort of flirt with certain ideas online. They begin to post things online. And before they know it, they're attending the rallies and they're becoming, quote unquote, true believers, right? And so what we are seeing now is we're seeing the manifestation. It's almost like an opportunity to let all of these folks come out to society and show them who they are and what they do. And so we in the law enforcement community are paying very close attention to who these folks are. And while we respect the First Amendment rights, for free assembly and expressing your opinions, when it turns violent and when they start trying to topple our government, that's when we have problems, and they're at that point violating the law, and law enforcement will do whatever it takes in order to ensure that our democracy survives this experience and goes on for generations to come.
So, Dr. Del Carmen, is it cyclical in any way? So we're seeing the spike in anti-Semitism right now, or sort of, this hate has been activated. Can we expect that this hate and then at some point will sort of go back to its dormant state and we'll have other issues from other groups that will arise? Or is this going to be activated until it boils over? Are we looking at a boiling point at somewhere in the future?
Right. The danger is that the boiling point may actually take effect before it goes dormant. And so there's always that one drop that will spill this over, and we just don't know what that is. And we also don't know what the future lies as it relates to foreign policy, domestic policies, and whatnot. What I worry about on a daily basis is that one day we're going to wake up and these, if you want to call them isolated groups throughout the nation that are protesting, engaging in violence, this and the other, are going to unify, and they're going to find more recruits. They're going to radicalize more people. And before we know it, we're going to have a problem that we cannot address as a society and we cannot address as a law enforcement community. That's what worries me and keeps me up at night.
What is the event that brings that to fruition? I guess my question is, I'll quit beating around the bush. If there's a terror attack on the United States, does that bring everything to the boiling point on our soil? Or is there something else that does that? In other words, is it a triggering event that brings us to the point that you just mentioned?
Exactly. And, in criminology, without getting too academic on you, I will tell you that we have a theory which is called anomie, right? The idea that at some point you strike that nerve and we become a quote-unquote anomie-like society, which means normlessness. And in this case, it would be a terrorist attack of the likes of 9/11. And then just imagine if something like that happens right now and we find out that such an act was committed by either one of these extreme groups. What will happen to our nation? What will happen to how we respond to it internationally? And where we are right now, where we are in a very, very weak position, I think, from a foreign policy perspective and domestic policy perspective, that I think it's kind of like the person almost being sick and almost getting there and then having some sort of a cold that will take that and tip that person over to end up at the hospital. That's what worries me about our country right now.
All right. So how do we fix that? If you talk about strengthening policy or preparing better, I don't feel like the territorialism that you talked about is very healthy in that regard. Certainly, there may be policies that we can employ to fix that, but can we get two sides of a political spectrum to agree on policy that's going to bring us together?
Yeah, the problem is that neither one of the extremists are logical, and oftentimes they cite things that are not necessarily based on facts. And so I would love to say to you that we just bring both sides together, we put them in a room, and then we start talking to them about factual information and how we're all part of this great country and this and the other, and that's going to make things better. Unfortunately, these groups are so radicalized that their way of seeing the world is something that will take over their faith, it will take over their values, and it will take over their actions. And so there's very little for us to do except to try to prevent others from joining them, that at that point it is going to make a difference between chaos and norms.
Yeah, and everyone's so rigid in their beliefs, nobody seems to want to listen to what anybody else is thinking either, right?
That's exactly right. And then, at the end of the day, people say, well, yeah, but, I'm rational and I'm right, right? Those are the two things that we hear from each group. And then you're sort of sitting there going, no, you're neither rational nor you're right. But unfortunately, they don't understand. They don't want to be educated. They don't want to see somebody else's perspective. And that's where education matters, right? And that's why as an educator, I'm always hopeful that through logic and through education, we're going to at least be able to convince 80% of the American people that they have to look at both sides. And they also have to remember that we are one United States of America, not 2, 3, 4, or certainly 50.
Yeah. Dr. Alex Del Carmen, what a wonderful conversation. I heard a quote earlier this week from someone that said that for many of us, if we see someone that disagrees with us, we assume that they're crazy, stupid, or evil. But nobody ever asks why they feel that way. They just assume that it's because they're either crazy, stupid, or evil. And so there's very little in the way of listening. There's just assumptions about the other side. Dr. Del Carmen, lovely conversation. Thank you so much for imparting some of your knowledge upon us and giving us basically a free introductory course to the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University. Thank you so much, my friend. I can't wait to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
Thank
very
you.
good.